The air inside the station house is dry, heavy with the scent of cheap coffee and suspicion, and the moment the old man in the faded denim jacket steps through the front doors, silence coils like a snake around the chatter eyes, cutting toward him, as if his mere presence challenges the order of the place. But it's not until he gently places the scuffed envelope on the front desk, requesting to speak with a detective, that the real trouble begins. Detective Kyle Brenner. A tall, sharp-jawed man in his late 30s with slicked hair and a smirk that never quite reaches his cold eyes, strides in with a badge clipped to his belt and authority in his voice sneering the moment he lays eyes on the man standing across from him. Let me guess another crank with a sob story, he mutters loud enough for everyone in the precinct lobby to hear, earning a few quiet chuckles from younger officers nearby. And when the old man doesn't respond, merely nods and slides the envelope forward, Brenner scoffs, flipping it open. You walked all the way in here for this. Some dusty photos, a wrinkled commendation, a claim you served in Vietnam. Sure you did. Gramps, his voice drips with condescension, but the old man doesn't flinch, just stands with hands clasped loosely in front of him, still as stone quiet as a prayer, his pale blue eyes unwavering, watching as Brenner laughs and tosses the envelope aside, calling over his shoulder, "Why don't you go try the VA? Maybe they'll give you a cookie." And the room bursts into low murmurs of amusement, but one younger officer, Rodriguez, glances uncertainly between them. Something about the stranger's stillness bothering him. Something that doesn't sit right because there's a dignity in his posture that doesn't belong to a liar. And though he's dressed simply with worn-out jeans and boots that have clearly known both mud and desert sand, there's a presence to him, something carved from silence and suffering. And when Brenner turns back, eyes flashing with a self-satisfied smirk, the old man finally speaks, his voice low and calm, like gravel smoothed by time. You think it's funny, detective, to mock a man for serving, and Brenner barks out a laugh. I think it's funny when guys like you walk in with fairy tales about medals and missions. No one's ever heard of trying to rewrite history for a few pats on the back. But now the lobby's no longer laughing because the old man doesn't raise his voice, doesn't plead or argue. He simply says, "What's your name, detective?" And Brenner raises an eyebrow. Kyle Brenner, badge number 31072. Why, you planning on writing a letter? But the old man nods slowly, his eyes narrowing just slightly. Then you'll want to remember that Mr. Brenner, when the inquiry comes, and there's something about the way he says it that silences the room again, that coiled patience of someone who's seen worse men fall, and someone murmurs, "Who is this guy?" And Rodriguez, still holding the envelope Brenner tossed, begins to flip through its contents carefully, now his brows knitting together as he pulls out an aged military ID, a black-and-white photo of a much younger version of the man before them, and a citation bearing the golden seal of the United States Congress, his lips parting in disbelief. Sir? This says you're Sergeant Major Daniel Rourke. Medal of Honor, Bronze Star, 3 Purple Hearts. But Brenner snatches it from his hand, scoffing, "Fake. Anyone with a printer and a decent story can cook this up." And the old man just watches him, expression unchanged, until finally he says, "Call the Pentagon." And the silence that follows is heavy, unnerving, because there's something unshakable in his tone, something that cuts through every shred of doubt like a scalpel through lies. And Rodriguez, ignoring Brenner's glare, pulls out his phone and walks toward his desk, tapping furiously, his hands slightly shaking now, because part of him already knows this is real. And outside the station the wind shifts, the first drops of rain beginning to fall on the city streets, tapping against the glass like fingers drumming a funeral march. And inside the station, Brenner is still laughing, still denying until Rodriguez's voice cuts through sharp and stunned. It's him. Oh my God. He's in the system. It's all real, every single word. And now the mood changes. Laughter replaced by unease. A crack running down the wall of arrogance that's protected men like Brenner for far too long. And the detective's jaw tightens as he steps closer, trying to reassert control. All right, fine. Maybe you were in the military, but that doesn't give you the right to waltz in here. Like you own the place, and... Rourke, finally, lifting his chin, replies with quiet steel. I didn't come for recognition. I came because the man you arrested last week for assaulting an officer was defending a woman from being harassed by your off-duty buddies in that bar. I was there. I saw it. And I've got the security footage, and now Brenner's face drains of color. That's not possible. But Rourke interrupts. It's already been submitted to Internal Affairs, along with a formal complaint. I thought you'd appreciate hearing it from me first, and the silence that follows is shattering a reckoning descending over the room, as eyes turn to Brenner, who stammers, backing away slightly. You think anyone's going to believe, but Rodriguez speaks now, firm and clear. They'll believe a Medal of Honor recipient with footage and a clean record going back 50 years. And suddenly, the man who moments ago mocked a hero is the one shrinking under the weight of accountability, the arrogance peeling off like old paint exposing the rot beneath. And Sergeant Major Daniel Rourke turns nods once to the officers now standing at attention. Not out of fear, but out of deep, shamed respect, and walks calmly out the door into the gray rain. His boots steady on the wet pavement. His back straight, unbowed. And as the door closes behind him, the precinct feels smaller somehow. The walls too tight for the truths that have just come to light. And later, when the review board arrives, when Brenner is placed on administrative leave, and the arrested man exonerated, the story spreads not just of a retired soldier who stood up to injustice, but of the day a man draped in humility reminded a room full of badges what honor actually looks like, and the lesson echoes far beyond the precinct walls that valor wears no uniform in retirement, that dignity does not demand permission to speak, and that the weight of a nation's highest medal is not in its shine, but in the silence it can command when a true hero finally decides, enough is enough. Outside, the rain has turned into a downpour, washing the city in silver sheets as Sergeant Major Daniel Rourke steps off the precinct steps and into the storm, with the same unshakable calm he had when parachuting into enemy fire half a century ago. Each raindrop sliding down the creases of his weathered face like time itself, paying tribute to the scars he never spoke of. And as he walks toward the rusted blue pickup parked across the street, a vehicle as stubborn and enduring as its owner, he doesn't look back, doesn't need to, because the silence behind him says more than any apology ever could. And across the city, in a small third-floor apartment in a forgotten neighborhood, a young black man named Marcus Tillman paces the floor nervously, his ankle monitor blinking red like a wound, not knowing that at this very moment, the man he tried to protect in that bar, the woman who was being cornered by drunken off-duty cops, has her truth finally rising like sunlight through storm clouds. Because when Rourke returned home after dropping off the footage, he didn't just make a phone call. He visited her, sat with her on the peeling couch in her studio apartment, and told her that it was time someone believed her story, that men like Marcus shouldn't pay the price for doing what was right, when the world kept rewarding those who wore badges like armor to shield their cruelty. And now, as internal affairs rolls in like a quiet wave behind closed doors, opening sealed case files and listening to testimonies with new ears, something begins to shift not just in the precinct, but in the hearts of those who had looked the other way for too long. Because Rourke's presence has awakened something inconvenient, something powerful. The kind of truth that doesn't just embarrass, it condemns. And Brenner, now suspended, sits in his office surrounded by cardboard boxes staring at a framed commendation he once bragged about, but never earned the way Rourke had his pride unraveling thread by thread as the weight of a consequence finally lands on his shoulders. And meanwhile, Marcus is called back to court. But this time, the judge isn't disinterested. The prosecutor doesn't scoff. And when Rourke steps into the courtroom wearing his best shirt and that battered denim jacket, no ribbons, no medals, just presence. People rise to their feet without even knowing why, instinctively moved by something unspoken yet undeniably noble. And when he takes the stand, his words are not angry but unflinchingly clear. What Marcus did that night was not a crime. It was character. And when the courtroom falls silent again, the judge nods, ruling not just for acquittal but ordering an inquiry into the original arrest, and outside reporters gather. But Rourke says nothing to them, just rests a hand on Marcus's shoulder and walks away. Because men like him don't do it for headlines. They do it because if they don't, who will? And as he disappears down the courthouse steps, an old Marine who fought in the Gulf and now drives a city bus leans out his window, hand raised in a solemn salute. No words needed, only shared understanding. And over the weeks that follow, whispers become stories. Stories become change precinct, policies begin to shift. Rookies are now required to attend sessions on veteran mental health, on racial bias, and on the history of those who served. Taught not from textbooks, but through the recorded testimony of men like Daniel Rourke, whose voice now lives in the Academy archives and back in his modest home, lined with photos of soldiers lost and letters folded too many times. Rourke finally lets himself sit, really sit and breathe. Not because justice has been fully served, but because the tide has turned even just a little. And that's enough for now. And across the mantel, a single frame holds his Medal of Honor. Not gleaming, but quiet, dignified, as if even the medal itself knows that heroism isn't forged in gold or ceremony, but in silence, sacrifice, and the decision to speak when silence would be safer. And in the end, his story is told not by him, but by those who now see clearer act, braver, and believe deeper. Because a man the world tried to forget walked into a police station one rainy day and refused to be invisible. 2 weeks later, the city holds a quiet ceremony. Not the kind wrapped in banners and brass bands, but one tucked into the heart of the Civic Center auditorium, where rows of chairs are filled not by politicians, but by veterans in wrinkled dress blues janitors with straight backs, school children holding hand-drawn flags, and a few precinct officers with bowed heads. And when Daniel Rourke is called to the stage, he doesn't step up like a hero returning home. He moves like a man who never left the battlefield, like every breath he's ever taken is still tethered to someone he lost. And as the mayor begins to speak, listing Rourke's accomplishments, the tours in Cambodia, the rescue under enemy fire, the boy he carried on his back 3 miles through open jungle with a shattered knee. Rourke doesn't blink, doesn't smile, just stands still, eyes scanning the crowd until they land on Marcus in the front row, dressed in a donated blazer, his hands folded tight as if unsure he belongs here. And when the mayor finishes offering Rourke a plaque polished to a shine, the old man takes it with a nod, but doesn't turn to the cameras. He turns to the audience and says, voice deep and unhurried, I didn't come here for applause. I came here because for too long we've let titles blind us to truth. We've let power excuse behavior, let uniforms hide cowards, and let real courage go unrecognized because it wasn't loud or easy or white enough to fit the narrative. Marcus Tillman is what this medal is about. Doing what's right when it's hard. Standing up when others sit down. Risking your life not in a war zone but in a parking lot, where justice forgot to show up and silence spreads like fire, reaching even the news crews who lower their cameras just slightly as if hearing something holy. And then one by one people begin to stand first. A woman in a nurse's uniform, then a teenager with a prosthetic leg, then a firefighter with soot still on his coat until the entire room is on its feet. Not clapping, just standing heads lifted in quiet reverence. And Rourke finally turns looks. Marcus, dead in the eye, and hands him the plaque, saying simply, You earned this more than I did. And Marcus tries to refuse shaking his head, his lips trembling. But Rourke places it firmly in his hands and steps back, his message clear. This isn't charity, it's justice overdue. And when they walk off stage together, side by side, a new kind of silence falls. Not of doubt, but of reckoning, the kind that lingers long after the chairs are folded and the lights dim. And somewhere in the back of the auditorium, Rodriguez watches it all. Notebook in hand, inspired beyond rules or orders, and decides. Right then, he's going to submit Rourke's testimony to the Academy curriculum, not just as a case study, but as required reading for every new cadet. And across the city, kids begin asking their parents who Daniel Rourke is. Teachers rewrite lesson plans to include modern heroes. And social media, normally, a graveyard of distraction, lights up with a photo someone snapped of Rourke and Marcus walking into the rain together. Their silhouettes side by side, captioned not with hashtags, but with a single line. Courage doesn't retire, and by the end of the month, something strange happens. Police complaints drop. Veterans receive more calls for interviews at city departments, and one precinct quietly installs a plaque in their lobby that reads, Respect is not worn on a badge. It's carried in how you treat the invisible. And Rourke, never one for crowds, returns to his quiet life volunteering at the local community center, teaching kids how to patch wounds, how to read a map, and how to stand up even when your knees shake, and some nights when Marcus visits they sit in silence, watching the streetlights flicker, 2 generations bound not by blood, but by something harder to define, earned trust. And when the news calls again, asking for another interview, Rourke declines, telling them gently, the story's been told. Now it's time for everyone else to write the ending. And so it goes. Not with medals, but with mentorship. Not with vengeance, but with a legacy passed hand to hand. One moment of respect at a time. Spring drifts into summer, and in the narrow alley behind the community center, where Daniel Rourke now spends his mornings sweeping broken glass and teaching neighborhood kids how to hold their breath underwater and not flinch when the world stares too hard. A mural begins to take shape. Spray cans hissing like whispered prayers as a group of teens, some of them once on the edge of gangs, now stand side by side under Marcus's direction, painting not graffiti, but legacy. And in the center of the wall, slowly emerging under layers of color and memory, is the image of Rourke standing tall in his tattered denim jacket, one hand on Marcus's shoulder, both of them facing forward into a swirl of light that doesn't come from flags or flames, but from the faces of people behind them. Teachers, mothers, janitors, soldiers. A city watching them, changed by them. And when the mural is done, no press shows up. No sirens. Wail, but something far louder happens. People begin to gather old men in wheelchairs with medals. No one asked about single mothers holding babies with one hand and cell phones in the other to take photos. Police officers without their weapons but with hands folded in front of them, as if asking forgiveness without words. And among the crowd is Rodriguez, now promoted, wearing plain clothes, but carrying the weight of every report he writes a little differently. And when Rourke arrives that evening, called down by one of the kids with a lie about a broken basketball net, he stops dead at the mouth of the alley, stunned into silence by the sight of himself. Not larger than life, but exactly as he is worn and real, and surrounded by those he's lifted simply by refusing to let the world forget what integrity looks like. And for a long time, he just stands there, the orange-pink sunset casting long shadows behind him as Marcus walks up, eyes shining, and says, "You always said people forget quiet heroes, so we made sure this one never gets erased. And Rourke, who's bled without crying, lost men without breaking, and stared down death more times than most, feels the sudden ache of tears rising uninvited. And when they fall, they do so silently, sliding down the same weathered lines carved into his face by jungle rain, desert wind. And now a mural's light, and beside him a child, no older than 10, tugs his sleeve and whispers, 'Mr. Rourke, were you really a soldier?' And Rourke kneels slowly, painfully, to look him in the eye, replying, 'I was a man who tried to do the right thing, even when no one was watching.' And the boy nods solemnly as if that's the bravest thing he's ever heard. And maybe it is because by the end of the week another mural begins to rise on the wall opposite. This time of Marcus' hands raised not in protest, but in protection, caught in the act of shielding a stranger in a bar from cruelty. And under it, a line in bold white reads, "Courage isn't who shouts the loudest. It's who stands when they're alone," and slowly, block by block, the neighborhood changes. Not because the city fixed it, but because men like Rourke reminded it how to fix itself. And when reporters return hungry for a redemption story to package for TV, Rourke simply waves them away, saying, "You don't need me anymore. The story is walking these streets now. Let it speak for itself." And he turns back to sweeping glass with the same quiet dignity he brought into that precinct, into war, into courtrooms and rain. Because in the end, true heroes don't build statues of themselves. They build people who don't need saving anymore. Late one evening, long after the children have gone home and the last flicker of daylight dies behind the rooftops, Daniel Rourke sits alone beneath the mural, a steaming cup of black coffee in his hand, watching as the street lamps buzz to life one by one, casting warm golden halos over the cracked sidewalk, where he taught Marcus to stand his ground, where he watched boys once lost to silence find their voices in spray cans and second chances. And in that quiet hour he senses it. Something shifting in the wind, not change but memory circling back because footsteps echo down the alley. And a figure approaches slowly, hesitantly. A young woman in her late 20s wearing a gray Army Reserve jacket, her posture straight but her eyes uncertain. And when she stops a few feet away, holding a folded envelope in her hand, Rourke lifts his gaze, studies her face, something in it achingly familiar. and she says, almost afraid to speak it aloud, "You were with the 3rd Recon Cambodia 72, and Rourke nods slowly. Hill 217, and the woman inhales, swallows, then extends the envelope to him, her voice trembling. My father, Staff Sergeant Elias Moore. He didn't come back, I found this. His last letter. It mentioned you, and Rourke takes the envelope gently, as if it might vanish in his hands, unfolding the paper with the kind of reverence one saves for sacred things. And as he reads, his hands begin to shake not from age, but from recognition, because the words are unmistakable. Elias writing of the night Rourke dragged him out of a burning tree line, how he refused evacuation until every wounded man was found, how he'd whispered to Elias, "If I make it out, I'll tell your story," and Rourke's eyes blur as he looks back up at her, voice thick. He saved me. I was the one who lived, because he took the hit, and she kneels before him now, tears on her cheeks, saying, "All my life they said he was just another casualty." But he wasn't forgotten, was he, and Rourke grips her hand tightly. Never. And in that moment, the alley is no longer just walls and brick. It becomes sacred ground, a place where the past finds its voice, and the dead are honored, not with flags, but with truth. And the next morning, when the mural is updated again, it now includes a 3rd figure, Elias Moore, painted with quiet strength beside Rourke and Marcus, the 3 of them standing shoulder to shoulder generations, linked not by blood, but by sacrifice and the vow to never let each other disappear. And word of the mural spreads not through media, but from veteran to veteran, whispered in VFW halls and homeless shelters, in waiting rooms and hospital beds. And soon others begin arriving, not to worship, but to remember men with prosthetic limbs, women with haunted eyes, young soldiers on the edge of giving up, and they leave notes at the wall photos, dog tags crumpled, letters never sent, and the alley behind the community center becomes something holy, a place where the forgotten find their name again. And Rourke every morning now reads one note aloud before sweeping the sidewalk, his voice low and steady like a benediction. And one evening Marcus stands beside him and asks, "Do you think it ever ends? The pain." The fight to be seen, and Rourke smiles, faint and tired. No, but the weight gets lighter when we carry it together, and for a moment they just stand there, 2 silhouettes beneath the glow of lamplight and painted memory, and behind them the city exhales, not in surrender, but in reverence for the few who never asked to be called heroes, but proved it anyway every damn day. Winter creeps in, quiet and cold, laying a thin veil of frost over the mural that now stretches the length of the alley wall, each face on it a story, each story a wound that finally stopped bleeding. And yet Daniel Rourke feels the ache more sharply these days, not just in his knees or his back, but in the silence between footsteps, the way the wind whistles through the chain-link fence, like an old friend calling him home. And though his body slows, his mornings remain the same: coffee before sunrise, sweeping the sidewalk before the world remembers it exists, reading letters left by strangers who somehow feel like family. And lately they come more often, young soldiers on leave, families who lost sons to war and truth to paperwork, even officers who once scoffed, but now stand quietly behind him, watching, listening, learning. And yet something darker stirs beneath the peace, because across town, in a council meeting filled with polished shoes and perfumed power, a motion is introduced. Redevelopment, urban renewal plans to level the old community center and replace the block with upscale condominiums and underground parking. And just like that, history is reduced to square footage. Memories buried under concrete and profit. And when Rourke hears, he doesn't rage. He simply folds the flyer in his hand and walks back to the mural, kneels in front of Elias Moore's painted eyes, and whispers, "They're coming for the place we built." And by that evening, Marcus has organized a vigil, not with signs or slogans, but with candles, hundreds of them, lining the alley in flickering rows of defiance and grief. And as night falls, the air turns electric with the presence of those who refuse to forget veterans in wheelchairs. Teens with paint on their hands, mothers holding faded photographs, even Chief Rodriguez, now captain, standing with his badge covered in black cloth in silent protest. And when the mayor arrives, press in tow. Smile rehearsed, Rourke doesn't speak first. Instead, he steps aside and lets the people talk. Lets a 12-year-old boy explain how learning to salute in that alley kept him from joining a gang. Lets an elderly woman describe how Rourke held her hand when the VA turned her away. Lets Marcus step up and say, voice shaking, but strong, "You want to build towers? Fine, but don't bulldoze our bones to do it." And by the time the mayor finally tries to speak, he's already too late. The vote collapses under the weight of real stories, and the plan is scrapped by morning, not out of pity, but because the city realizes what it nearly erased. And in the weeks that follow, something extraordinary happens. The alley is renamed officially Valor Way, and the community center receives emergency funding not from the government, but from private donations pouring in across the country. Veterans mailing $5 checks with notes like, "For the man who stood when I couldn't." And one day, a delivery truck arrives with no sender carrying a glass case and a single object inside Daniel Rourke's Medal of Honor stolen decades ago. In a burglary, returned now with a letter that reads, "I took something that wasn't mine, but the world gave it back to you." And when Rourke opens the box, his hands trembling, he doesn't weep or smile. He simply places it at the foot of the mural beneath the painted heart of Elias Moore, and walks away, because that's the only place it's ever belonged. Not around his neck, but where others can see it, feel it, believe in it. And long after he's gone, long after the broom has stopped sweeping and the coffee cup sits cold on the bench, the mural remains untouched, lit every night by solar lamps installed by a kid who once tried to rob the center but stayed to repaint it instead. And beside it a plaque reads, "In memory of Sergeant Major Daniel Rourke." He didn't ask to be remembered, so we made sure he was. Spring returns, quietly brushing the city with soft winds and pale sun. And though the community center hums with life children laughing in the courtyard, veterans sharing quiet coffee in folding chairs, teenagers touching up the edges of the ever-growing mural, there is a stillness in the air, a hush that lingers like a breath held too long, because for the first time in years, Daniel Rourke's chair remains empty. His broom, untouched, the worn bench beneath Elias Moore's eyes left undisturbed, and those who pass by lower their voices instinctively, as if entering hallowed ground, for the man who once swept the broken glass from their streets has been gone for 3 days now, not missing, just absent. And Marcus, now working full-time at the center, knows why he'd seen it in Rourke's eyes, that quiet surrender, the way he looked up at the mural one night and said, "I think I finally left it all behind," and now, as dawn breaks on the 4th day, Marcus climbs the stairs of the modest second-floor apartment tucked above the old tailor shop where Rourke lived, knocking gently, already bracing for the silence. And when the door opens, it isn't Rourke who greets him, but silence thick and warm, the kind that wraps around you like a blanket stitched with memory. And Marcus steps inside, finds the old man sitting in his favorite armchair. Eyes closed, face peaceful, as if listening to something far away, and in his lap rests a folded letter with Marcus's name on it, along with a small bronze pin. An Army Ranger tab worn thin with age, and for a long moment Marcus cannot move, cannot breathe, and then he kneels, not to cry, but to whisper, "I'll carry it now." And from that day forward the rhythm of Valor Way changes slightly reverently, because though Rourke is gone, his presence doesn't leave it deepens. Children begin every lesson beneath the mural with a moment of silence. Officers from the precinct now volunteer on weekends, and every year, on the day he passed, they hold a quiet march down Valor Way. No speeches, no bands, just people walking, holding candles, placing boots and medals and thank you letters at the base of the wall, and on the 5th anniversary, something remarkable happens. An elderly woman arrives from out of state dressed in a floral blouse and pearls, carrying a dusty leather box. And when Marcus opens it, his hands shaking, he finds dozens of faded photographs. Rourke in uniform, Rourke with soldiers, Rourke with children in war-torn villages overseas, and a single newspaper clipping that reads, "Man risks life to pull 3 wounded from burning barracks. Refuses recognition, and beneath it, handwritten in blue ink, are the words he never told anyone. He didn't have to. And so the wall grows again, not just in paint, but in purpose, with a new section titled Unsung, where faces of lesser-known heroes now appear beside Rourke's. Each name carefully researched, each story preserved by the community he left behind. And Marcus, now 33 grayer at the temples than he should be, finds peace not in medals, but in the laughter of the kids he teaches in the shoulders. He steadies, and in the echo of Rourke's words. The weight gets lighter when we carry it together. And on some nights, when the wind moves just right, when the lights flicker softly along the mural, those who walk Valor Way swear. They hear it, that familiar broom sweeping against the sidewalk, that deep voice humming an old cadence, and they smile, knowing that some heroes never really leave. They just become the streetlights that guide others home. 10 years later, the city is no longer the same, but in the best ways. Where glass once shattered beneath forgotten shoes, where silence once choked the names of the brave valor. Way now pulses like a living artery through the heart of the neighborhood, its walls blooming with murals. Not just of soldiers, but of teachers, medics, single mothers, lost boys turned mentors. Each face a brush stroke of sacrifice, of story, of something worth remembering. And in the center of it all stands a bronze statue, simple, humble, unpolished, of Daniel Rourke. Not in full uniform, not saluting, but just as he was remembered best, in his tattered denim jacket, hands in his pockets, gaze fixed forward like he's still watching over the alley he once swept every dawn. At his feet lies an open bench where strangers sit to think, to cry, to pray, to rest. And carved into the bench are the words he left behind in his final letter to Marcus. You don't need to become me. You only need to keep the light on long enough for the next one to find their way. Marcus now wears a weathered ball cap instead of the Ranger tab, teaches full-time at the rebuilt Youth Academy 2 blocks down, and every week without fail he walks the alley in silence, lays a fresh broom by the statue, and reads one letter aloud from the wall's offerings. Letters from veterans trying to heal kids, trying to stay alive, and people who once felt invisible finally finding themselves reflected in paint and stone. And this year, the letter he reads is from a girl named Eva, 15 years old, whose brother took his life after returning from deployment. And she writes, "I didn't understand why he never smiled. I thought he was broken. But then I came here, and I saw the wall, and I realized he wasn't broken. He was just carrying too much alone. Thank you for building a place where he would have been seen." And Marcus can't finish the letter. He chokes halfway through, eyes stinging, but the crowd that gathers around him doesn't need him to. They understand. They always do. And far across town, tucked beneath a highway overpass, where forgotten men still sleep beside rusted grocery carts and torn blankets, someone has painted a small symbol, Daniel Rourke's Ranger tab in red and gold, beneath it. The words, "Seen, remembered, still marching." And though the city grows, though condos rise and traffic drowns the past, that mark spreads block by block until it becomes a quiet rebellion of remembrance on walls. In classrooms, in precinct, locker rooms, in bus terminals, and churches and late-night cafes. And once a year, on the night the candles are lit down, Valor Way, a boy who never met Daniel Rourke, walks the alley with a backpack full of fresh brooms, placing one at each mural with care. His name is Elias. He was born the year Rourke died. And when people ask why he does it, he shrugs and says simply, "Because he swept the path. Now it's my turn to keep it clean." And then one autumn evening, just as the golden hour spills like honey across the walls of Valor Way, something unexpected happens. Something quiet but seismic. A black SUV with government plates pulls to a gentle stop at the edge of the alley. Its doors open and out steps a woman in a tailored military uniform, silver clusters of stars on her shoulders, ribbons lining her chest like a silent biography. She walks slowly, hands behind her back posture, rigid from decades of command, but her eyes soften the moment they meet the statue of Daniel Rourke. She stops, breathes, then turns to Marcus now, gray at the temples, hands calloused from labor and love, who's just finished guiding a group of high school kids through the mural. And she says, voice formal yet trembling, "I'm General Camille Bryant. I served with Rourke's nephew in Kandahar. Before he died, he asked me to do one thing, find this place and thank the man who made it." Marcus's heart skips, because for a moment it feels like Daniel is here again, in the wind, in the rustle of the leaves, in the sudden hush of the children gathering nearby. He gestures toward the bench, and they sit beneath the statue's quiet gaze. Camille reaches into her jacket and pulls out a folder thick-sealed in red tape and says, "These are declassified now missions. Your mentor led. Things no one was ever supposed to know. He wasn't just a hero. He was the reason some of us are alive." Marcus opens it with trembling hands. Black and white photos of jungle rescue ops scribbled orders bearing Rourke's signature witness statements from soldiers he pulled from fire. Even a transcript of a failed medal upgrade blocked for political reasons decades ago. The weight of it crushes him. "He never told me," Marcus whispers. Camille smiles gently. "Of course not. Real heroes don't. They just leave footprints deep enough for the rest of us to follow." By week's end, something even more unbelievable follows a formal letter from the Department of Defense delivered by hand, announcing that Daniel Rourke posthumously and unanimously has been awarded the Medal of Valor, the first of its kind, created to honor not just battlefield courage, but moral courage beyond uniform. A ceremony is proposed. National coverage. A grand unveiling. But Marcus refuses the pomp. He speaks to the crowd gathered on Valor Way with a single sentence. If he were here, he'd just nod and ask who's sweeping tomorrow. So, instead of marble halls or fireworks, the community holds the only ceremony that would have made Daniel smile. They repaint the alley's entrance with a new mural this time. Not a person, but a path. A dirt road winding into sunlight boots left behind like stepping stones. At its start, a single broom leans against a sign that reads, "This is where heroes walk." And on that day, as the nation watches on live streams and in headlines, a boy named Elias now, 18, now strong, now ready, steps forward, lifts that broom, and begins to sweep, and years pass. Decades, even the city around Valor Way transforms. With time, glass towers rise beyond the skyline. Autonomous cars hum through intersections and digital billboards. Flash futures that men like Daniel Rourke never lived to see. But the alley remains untouched. A sacred scar in the heart of progress. They tried once a tech developer from Silicon Valley to buy the block for a startup campus. Offered millions, promised job growth. But the neighborhood rose like a storm. Veterans, mothers, bus drivers, old gang leaders, turned mentors, locking arms in silence at sunrise, not with signs, but with presence. And the developer backed down by sundown, shaken not by force, but by the power of memory that could not be priced. Now, Valor Way is studied, taught, revered. University students from across the world visit it as part of modern civic legacy tours. The alley's murals have expanded to every wall in the surrounding streets, each one bearing the names of those who once stood alone, and now stand forever together in paint and shadow. In the community center, now renamed the Rourke Institute for Honor and Resilience, a museum quietly operates, not sterile or cold, but raw, beating with audio interviews, salvaged letters, field journals from lost soldiers, and a glass case that holds a single item that stops everyone in their tracks. The old denim jacket folded carefully beside the restored Medal of Honor and the once stolen Ranger tab. A plaque beneath it reads, "He never wore it for the world. He wore it to carry the weight others couldn't." Marcus is long gone now, buried not far from Rourke, beneath a simple headstone carved with nothing but his name, and the words carried the light. But Elias remains, grown, weathered kind. He walks Valor Way every morning still, though his knees are slower and his hair streaked with gray. He carries a broom. Of course, he always does, and with him walks a young girl. His granddaughter Ava, barefoot on warm pavement full of questions and stories, eyes wide as the alley unfolds around her. One morning she asks him, "Grandpa, why do we sweep it every day if it always gets messy again?" And Elias smiles, kneels down, places the broom in her small hands and says, "Because the world forgets fast. But if we keep sweeping, they'll remember where the path begins." And that night, Ava paints her first mural, a small one tucked into a corner by the bench. Just the outline of two figures walking side by side. One tall, one small, both with brooms, and beneath it, in her own shaky handwriting, she writes, "Keep the way clear, someone's coming." Winter comes again, soft and silent, dusting the rooftops of the city like a memory that refuses to fade. Snow gathers on the ledges of Valor Way, rests gently atop murals, now sealed in protective glass, and clings to the bronze shoulders of Daniel Rourke's statue, as if nature itself is trying to honor the man who once stood watch without needing a uniform, a weapon, or a podium. The alley is quiet this morning, save for the soft crunch of boots. Elias walks slower now, his back, slightly hunched breath visible in the cold, but he is not alone. Beside him walks Ava, older. Now 13, her scarf trailing like a flag in the wind, eyes fixed ahead. She doesn't need to be told what to do. She carries the broom before Elias can even hand it over. They sweep together in silence, not because there's nothing to say, but because some traditions are too sacred for words. As they reach the base of the mural where Daniel first stood beside Marcus, Ava stops. Her gaze lingers on a new addition. Someone painted overnight a fourth figure, joining Daniel, Marcus, and Elias. It's her small and determined, holding a broom almost too big for her arms. No signature, no fanfare, just a quiet acknowledgement from the community that the torch has passed once again. Ava looks up at Elias' grandpa. Will they ever forget us? Her voice is soft but serious, the kind of question children only ask when they've seen the weight of the world early. Elias kneels, hands trembling slightly as he adjusts her scarf. Only if we stop walking. She nods, understanding more than any 13-year-old should, and keeps sweeping. Across the city, in a broadcast studio lit by cold LEDs, a television host reads a breaking news story. The National Archives have just released a digital memorial built using AI and oral histories, titled The Quiet One's Legacy of Valor Way. It documents the decades-long ripple effect of Daniel Rourke's defiance that one walk into a police station that changed everything. And among the faces scanned and featured in the archive is a child sweeping snow from a mural in a city alleyway. The clip goes viral not because of tragedy or outrage, but because people recognize something in that child. Steadiness, inheritance, hope. And weeks later, on a cold Sunday morning, the President of the United States visits Valor Way unannounced. No cameras, no speeches, only security at a distance and the sound of fresh snow crunching beneath leather soles. The President lays a wreath at the base of the Rourke statue, steps back, salutes, and turns to Ava standing nearby, broom in hand, cheeks red from the cold. He lowers his voice and says, "My father was in that same war. He never talked about it. But if he were here, I think he'd thank you." Ava doesn't reply. She just nods and keeps sweeping. And somewhere far above the city, where satellites blink and storms pass unseen, the alley remains lit by warm lanterns, guarded by painted eyes, and walked each morning by a girl with a broom in her hand and a story in her blood. And then on a spring morning, where the air smells faintly of wet brick and cherry blossoms blooming against rusted gutters, something happens that no one expects. A letter arrives, not by email, not through a donation portal or official agency, but by post. Real paper. A real envelope. Handwritten, addressed simply to the girl who sweeps Valor Way. Ava finds it tucked into the side gate of the community center, damp around the edges. No return address. She peels it open under the mural's shade, sitting cross-legged beneath the painted eyes of Daniel Rourke. The ink is shaky smudged, but the words are clear. You don't know me, but I watched you sweep once I was sitting 2 blocks away under a scaffolding, planning to end everything that day. But then I saw you. Just a kid sweeping like it mattered. Like keeping that alley clean was the most important job in the world. You didn't see me, but you saved me. I never came back until now. Ava's hands tremble as she reads, and by the time she finishes, the letter is soaked, not with rain, but with her own quiet, startled tears. She looks up the world sharper now, more fragile, more sacred. And without a word, she rises, walks into the center, finds the bulletin board reserved for community notes and remembrance, and pins the letter beneath a new heading, Swept Lives. It doesn't take long. Within weeks, more letters appear. Folded notes tucked between bricks, envelopes left under doorsteps, messages from people no one thought were watching, recovering addicts, former gang members, a retired officer who once worked under Brenner's corrupt leadership and has spent years trying to make things right. They all say the same thing. You saved me. Not by what you said, but by showing up. So the alley changes again, not in what it looks like, but in what it holds. A new wall is painted beside the others, smaller, quieter. No faces, just handwritten messages transcribed and sealed under glass like sacred graffiti. Still, here I didn't go through with it. I walked a different way because you swept that path. The Rourke Institute responds by launching a new program, the Ava Line. Not a hotline, not therapy, just a place to listen, a place where one person, one volunteer will simply stay. No advice, no saving, just presence. And every volunteer is trained not in psychology or procedure, but in the same philosophy Daniel Rourke lived by. You don't need a uniform to carry someone out of the fire, just the willingness to walk into it with them. Ava, now 17, helps train them, and after every session she sweeps, always. The broom is no longer a symbol, it's a vow, and one day she hears it a rustling behind her light footsteps. A boy, maybe 12, thin, hood-up eyes darting, like he's not sure if he belongs. He doesn't speak, just watches. Then, slowly, hesitantly, he reaches for the second broom leaning against the wall. Ava says nothing, just nods. They sweep together. Two figures in an alley that once belonged to a single old man. No one believed. Now, a sanctuary, a shrine, a movement. And on the mural's edge, a new line is painted in bold black letters that shimmer in morning sun. One broom, one alley. One world made lighter together. And then on the eve of Ava's 18th birthday, as twilight cloaks the city in gold and hush, a knock echoes through the quiet hall of the Rourke Institute. Not frantic, not formal, just steady. When Ava opens the door, a man stands there, tall, wiry, early 60s, wearing a faded Marine Corps hoodie and carrying a long wooden case. His eyes are tired in the way soldiers' eyes get when they've seen too much and spoken too little. He doesn't say hello. He just holds out the case and says, "He left this. For you. Told me to wait until you were ready." Inside the case is a broom. Old hand-carved its handle, worn smooth by decades of calloused fingers. Bristles soft but resilient. Along the wooden shaft are etchings words scorched into the grain by a hot nail and a patient hand. For the next who chooses to carry, the initials below it, D.R. Ava doesn't cry. She just presses her forehead against the handle like it's a relic, like it's sacred, which it is. And that night, for the first time, she places her own boots beside the bronze statue of Daniel Rourke, lays the broom in front of him, and speaks out loud. Not for the crowd that has gathered silently behind her, but for him. I'm ready now. You can rest. And from that moment the torch passes fully. The girl becomes the keeper. A year later, Valor Way becomes a national landmark, not because officials pushed for it, but because a petition with over 10 million signatures demanded it. Veterans sign survivors, teachers, paramedics, children. The president attends the ceremony. No speeches needed. Just silence. Just respect. But Ava doesn't stay for the cameras. She steps away into the alley where a dozen children wait, some orphaned, some angry, some barely speaking, and she hands each of them a small hand-painted broom. Not a toy, a promise. And then 5 years later, after she's written 2 books, built programs in 7 cities, and turned down every government award offered to her, Ava does something Daniel Rourke never had the chance to do. She disappears. Not in tragedy, not in grief. In purpose, she leaves only a note behind, pinned beneath the final mural she paints. One that shows no faces, no heroes, no uniforms. Just a long path, swept clean, lit by lanterns. The note says, "If you find this alley, keep it clean. If you walk this road, leave it better. There will always be someone coming. Make sure they're not walking alone. My name was Ava. I followed a man who followed no one but the truth. Now it's your turn, and from that day forward, no one ever owns Valor Way, because everyone does." And so the alley remains quiet, eternal sacred. No matter how high the skyline climbs, or how fast the world forgets valor, Way stands still, swept clean each morning by hands that never ask to be remembered, only to remember. No name is carved in stone forever. No hero lives without scars. But what Daniel Rourke began, what Marcus continued, what Ava carried will never fade, because now every broom lifted in silence, every mural painted in shadow, every step taken down that alley says the same thing. You matter. You're seen, and you're not walking alone. Some stories shout for attention, but the ones that change the world, they whisper and never stop walking. If this story moved you, if it reminded you that quiet courage still matters, if you believe heroes don't always wear medals, but carry brooms, truth, and love, then don't just walk with us. Subscribe to our channel for more stories that sweep the dust off forgotten lives and shine light where the world once looked away. Hit the bell. Share the message. Keep the way clear, because someone is always coming and they'll need you there.